Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the clammy, coal-smoke-infused air of Victorian England. Picture it, gas lamps flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on cobblestone streets. The clip-clop of horses' hooves echoes in the night. You trudge through fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, your lungs burning from the smog. You're exhausted, utterly drained from a 12-hour shift in a factory that sounds like a demon's orchestra. You're desperate for sleep, but sleep, well, sleep seems determined to play hide-and-seek. Given the hygiene standards of the day, you probably won't survive this trip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You finally collapse into your bed, a lumpy mattress stuffed with who knows what. Probably things that once lived. You pull the heavy woolen blankets up to your chin, trying to ignore the scratching and the faint scent of mothballs. You close your eyes, willing sleep to come, but your mind is a runaway train, rattling through the events of the day, the worries of tomorrow, the endless noise. Your neighbor's dog starts barking, and then a cat joins in. It's a regular symphony of sleeplessness. Welcome to the world of Victorian insomnia. It was a thing, a big thing. And if you thought modern life was stressful, imagine navigating the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution, in all its soot-covered glory, was in full swing. Factories churned out goods day and night, and people were flocking to cities in search of work. London, Manchester, Birmingham, they exploded in population, becoming overcrowded, polluted, and, well, rather unpleasant places to live. You're crammed into a tiny, damp apartment with your family, sharing a room with half a dozen other people. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, sweat, and something vaguely rotten. Outside, the sounds of the city never cease. Cries of street vendors, the rumble of carts, the relentless clang of machinery. It's a constant assault on your senses. Good luck getting any shut-eye. Now, you might think that all this hard work and grim living would make people exhausted enough to sleep like logs. But, ironically, it was often the opposite. The stress, the long hours, the poor diet, the constant stimulation, it all contributed to a widespread epidemic of sleeplessness. One major culprit was the shift towards artificial lighting. Gas lamps, while a marvel of the age, disrupted people's natural sleep patterns. Before gaslight became widely available, evenings were darker, quieter, and generally more conducive to slumber. But now, with the flick of a switch, or, more accurately, the turn of a valve, you could extend your day indefinitely. Historians still argue whether this artificial extension of the day contributed significantly to increased productivity or simply made everyone more anxious and sleep-deprived. Either way, Netflix wasn't around yet, so you were probably just reading by the dim, flickering light, worrying about your rent. And then there were the social pressures. The Victorian era was a time of strict social codes and anxieties about respectability. You had to maintain appearances, no matter how exhausted you were. You had to worry about your social standing, your family's reputation, and whether your bonnet was properly angled. Okay, maybe not you, but someone back then definitely worried about that. The constant performance of Victorian society could be exhausting in and of itself. So, what did our sleep-deprived Victorian ancestors do to cope? Well, they tried all sorts of remedies, some more effective than others. Opium, of course, was a popular choice. Laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol, was readily available and widely used as a painkiller and sleep aid. Think of it as the Victorian equivalent of melatonin, but with a slightly higher risk of addiction. You could pop down to the local apothecary and purchase a bottle of laudanum for a few pennies. It was advertised as a cure-all for everything from coughs and colds to hysteria and, yes, insomnia. Of course, no one really understood the addictive properties of opium at the time. It was just another miracle cure, like electricity and snake oil. But even if you were wary of opium, there were plenty of other options. Various patent medicines, often containing a cocktail of questionable ingredients, promised a good night's sleep. These concoctions might include things like bromide, chloral hydrate, or even, wait for it, chloroform. Yes, the same stuff they used to knock people unconscious in detective novels. Imagine that. You're tossing and turning, unable to sleep, So you gulp down a spoonful of chloroform. Instant slumber, guaranteed. Just try not to wake up in a ditch somewhere. Beyond the realm of dubious pharmaceuticals, there were more natural remedies. Herbal teas, warm baths, and regular exercise were all touted as ways to improve sleep. Of course, finding a quiet place for a warm bath in a crowded Victorian tenement could be a challenge. And regular exercise might mean walking to the factory and back, which, while technically exercise, probably wasn't doing much to calm your nerves. One particularly quirky remedy involved sleeping with a piece of flannel soaked in camphor oil under your pillow. Camphor, a fragrant compound derived from trees, was believed to have soothing properties. The idea was that the scent would relax your mind and lull you to sleep. Whether it actually worked is debatable, but at least your pillow smelled nice. That's more than you can say for most things back then. There were also more esoteric approaches to insomnia. Spiritualism, for example, was a popular pastime in Victorian England. People would gather in darkened rooms, hold seances, and try to communicate with the spirits of the dead. Some believed that insomnia was caused by restless spirits, and that by communicating with them, you could find peace and finally get some rest. Because nothing soothes the soul like a room full of strangers channeling dead people. One particularly eccentric belief held that insomnia was caused by an imbalance of animal magnetism. This theory, popularized by a German physician named Franz Mesmer, hence the term mesmerized, suggested that all living beings possessed a magnetic fluid, and that illness could be cured by manipulating this fluid. So, you might find yourself lying on a couch, while a magnetizer waves his hands over your body, trying to realign your magnetic forces and cure your sleeplessness. Ultimately, the Victorian approach to insomnia was a mixed bag of folk remedies, dubious pharmaceuticals, and pseudoscientific theories. Some of these methods might have offered temporary relief, but none addressed the underlying causes of the problem: the stress, the noise, the pollution, and the sheer grind of Victorian life. The constant anxiety over social standing, combined with the ever-present threat of poverty, made true relaxation a luxury few could afford. You see, sleep was not merely a biological need. It became another arena for societal anxieties to play out. And some historians believe that, even though the number of hours slept was statistically similar to today, the reported instances of insomnia were higher due to the increased focus on and expectation of perfect sleep. So next time you toss and turn at night, remember that you're not alone. You're part of a long and illustrious tradition of sleeplessness, stretching back to the fog-choked streets of Victorian England. And maybe, just maybe, that thought will help you drift off to sleep. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's dim those lights a little more, shall we? Just breathe in and out. Perfect. Tonight, or rather, right now, we're tumbling down the rabbit hole of how doctors, healers, and frankly, some real weirdos have tried to figure out why you're staring at the ceiling instead of, sleeping. You trudge through another day, powered by caffeine and sheer willpower, all the while haunted by the phantom sensation of soft pillows and deep, restorative slumber. You crave that feeling like a desert wanderer craves water. But, alas, sleep remains elusive. So, naturally, you start Googling. And that, my friend, is when things get interesting. Way back when, we're talking ancient Egypt, pyramids and all, folks believed that insomnia, or a lot of ailments for that matter, could be caused by angry gods. Makes sense, right? You offend Ra, sun god extraordinaire, and suddenly you're cursed with an eternal daylight party in your head. The treatment? Appeasement, offerings, prayers, and maybe a sacrifice or two. Hopefully nothing too valuable. That sarcophagus looked pretty comfy. They might also suggest chanting spells or wearing amulets. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of popping melatonin and hoping for the best. And hey, who are we to judge? If it gets you to sleep, maybe RA is listening. Now, around the same time, there was this fascinating, shall we say, less mainstream theory floating around. Some believed that insomnia was caused by tiny invisible demons who would whisper anxieties and disturbing thoughts into your ears all night long. These weren't your run-of-the-mill demons, mind you. They were specialized in sleep disruption. Historians still argue whether this belief was a literal interpretation of inner turmoil or a reflection of societal anxieties projected onto the unseen. But regardless, You have to appreciate the dedication. Think about it. Sleep-specific demons. That's commitment to the craft. I bet they have little demon business cards that say, "Nightmares are specialty." Fast forward a few centuries, and the Greeks are having a go at figuring out our persistent wakefulness. Hippocrates, the OG Dr. Dude, believed that imbalances in the body's humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, lovely, were to blame. Too much black bile? Congratulations, you're melancholic, and probably not sleeping. The solution? A carefully balanced diet, exercise, and maybe a good bloodletting. Don't worry, I'm sure they had charming bedside manner. Think of it as the ancient Greek equivalent of a juice cleanse, but with leeches. But never one to be outdone in the weirdness department. Some physicians during this time also attributed insomnia to wandering wombs. Yes, you read that right. The womb, according to some, could detach itself and roam freely throughout the body, causing all sorts of havoc, including sleep disturbances. The cure? Apparently, luring the womb back to its proper location with pleasant smells. I'm picturing a posse of doctors chasing after a rogue uterus with lavender sachets. Honestly, you can't make this stuff up. Thank goodness we've moved on from that theory. Can you imagine explaining that to HR? Skip ahead a few more centuries, and we land smack dab in the Middle Ages. The prevailing medical theory? Well, it was still somewhat humor-based, but with a strong dose of religious influence. Sin, of course, could be a major sleep disruptor. The remedy? Confession, prayer, and repentance. Basically, feel guilty and hope for the best. Also, be careful of witches and evil spirits lurking in the shadows, because nothing helps you sleep like the existential dread of demonic possession. And then, of course, there were the more creative remedies. One particularly delightful suggestion involved sleeping with a piece of parchment inscribed with a prayer or a magical incantation under your pillow. Apparently, the angels were very particular about proper paperwork before granting sleep. Think of it as the medieval version of a sleep app, but with added divine intervention. Did it work? Well, probably not. But hey, at least you die knowing you had all your spiritual bases covered. Historians still argue whether these treatments were genuinely believed to be effective or were simply a form of psychological comfort in a time of great uncertainty. The Renaissance brought a renewed interest in classical medical texts and a burgeoning spirit of scientific inquiry. However, old habits die hard, and the humor theory persisted. But, alongside that, you start to see the beginnings of a more observational approach to medicine. Doctors began to meticulously record patient symptoms, looking for patterns and correlations. They started to realize that things like diet, lifestyle, and mental state could all play a role in sleep. Revolutionary. But, of course, there were still a few holdovers from the weirder side of medical history. One prominent Renaissance physician suggested that insomnia could be cured by, wait for it, hanging a dead owl over the bed. Yes, a dead owl. Apparently, the owl's nocturnal essence would magically transfer to the sleeper, inducing slumber. I'm picturing your average interior decorator politely declining that request. And honestly, just think about the smell. I bet your sleep problems would become the least of your worries. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the rise of modern medicine as we know it. With advancements in anatomy, physiology, and neurology, doctors began to understand the complexities of the nervous system and the brain. Insomnia was no longer simply a matter of humors or demons. It was now a potential symptom of underlying medical conditions, stress, or psychological disorders. This also saw a rise in the use of sedatives, which, while effective in inducing sleep, often came with a whole host of nasty side effects. And, of course, this was also the era of patent medicines and snake oil salesmen. One particularly popular remedy for insomnia involved a concoction of alcohol, opium, and various herbs, guaranteed to knock you out and possibly shorten your lifespan. The ads were always so convincing, weren't they? Cure all your ailments while simultaneously achieving perfect inner peace. Yeah, right. Historians still argue whether the rise of modern medicine truly displaced these older, more mystical approaches or if they simply went underground, resurfacing in alternative medicine practices. Which brings us to today. We now understand that insomnia is a complex disorder with a multitude of potential causes, from stress and anxiety to underlying medical conditions and poor sleep hygiene. We have sophisticated diagnostic tools, evidence-based treatments, and a whole host of lifestyle changes we can make to improve our sleep. We have sleep studies, cognitive behavioral therapy, and a dizzying array of over-the-counter and prescription sleep aids. And yet, despite all our progress, insomnia remains a persistent problem for millions of people. We're still searching for that perfect solution, that magic bullet that will banish sleeplessness forever. And let's be honest, every now and then, we still find ourselves Googling those weird, ancient remedies, just in case. Just in case there's something the ancient Egyptians or the wandering womb theorists were onto. After all, desperate times call for desperate measures. So, as you lie there, wide awake at 3 a.m., remember that you're not alone. You're part of a long and storied history of sleeplessness. And who knows, maybe one day, we'll finally crack the code to perfect sleep. But until then, you can always try hanging a dead owl over your bed. I mean, what do you have to lose, besides maybe your sanity? Just kidding. Don't do that. Seriously. Well, unless maybe. Okay, let's settle in, loosen those shoulders, and breathe. Imagine you trudge along a dusty road, the sun beating down. Your head throbs, your back aches, and frankly, you just feel awful. It's the 1800s, maybe a little earlier, and the local apothecary is your only hope. Inside, shelves groan under the weight of mysterious jars and bottles, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs, and something else. Something sweet, almost cloying. That, my friend, is probably opium. You see, for centuries, opium was the go-to cure-all. Got a cough? Opium. Can't sleep? Opium. Baby teething? Oh, you know they're getting opium. It was the Swiss Army knife of medicine, the WD-40 of wellness. Everyone was at it. From the wealthiest lady clutching her laudanum vial to the poorest peasant seeking relief from backbreaking labor, opium held them in its gentle, albeit deceptive, embrace. Think of it as the Victorian era's version of popping an Advil, except, way more potent. And addictive. The funny thing is, its origins are actually pretty fascinating. Its use can be traced all the way back to ancient Sumeria, where it was known as Hulgil, the joy plant. Imagine, they knew the exact right marketing term. Later, the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all caught on to opium's pain-relieving and sleep-inducing properties. Cleopatra herself supposedly used it, perhaps as a sneaky sleep aid during those long political meetings with Mark Antony. Although, honestly, who wouldn't need a little something to get through that drama? Mainstream historians often highlight opium's role in ancient trade, which is quite interesting if you enjoy reading boring documents. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Did you know that some people used to believe opium could actually protect you from disease? Yeah, you heard right. Like, oh, I feel a cold coming on, better dose myself with some black goo. The logic, if you can call it that, was that it strengthened the body's vital spirits. Talk about missing the mark. It's like believing that replacing the engine oil in your car with chocolate syrup will make it run better. Spoiler alert, it won't. It might, however, make you crave a chocolate milkshake. But seriously, the widespread acceptance of opium preparations stemmed from a genuine need. Medical knowledge was, shall we say, limited back then. Doctors didn't really understand germ theory or the importance of hygiene. They treated everything from gout to gangrene with the same vague remedies and a hefty dose of wishful thinking. So, when something like opium actually provided noticeable relief, even if it was just masking the symptoms, it was hailed as a miracle. One particularly popular concoction was laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol. Picture a dark, syrupy liquid dispensed by the drop. Laudanum was the darling of the Victorian era, the go-to solution for everything from menstrual cramps to melancholia. It was even given to children, often to quiet them down or help them sleep. You have to wonder about the state of playgrounds back then. Imagine a bunch of opium-addled toddlers swaying gently on the swings. And if that doesn't sound like a horror film, I don't know what does. And it wasn't just the lower classes relying on opium-based remedies. Oh no, the upper crust were just as keen. Writers, artists, and intellectuals often turned to opium for inspiration, believing it could unlock the doors of perception and unleash their creative potential. Coleridge, for example, claimed to have written Kubla Khan in an opium-induced dream. Now, Whether that's true or just a convenient excuse for writing something completely bonkers is another question entirely. Let's be honest, though. If I could blame my questionable life decisions on opium, I absolutely would. But here's the thing. Beneath the soothing surface, opium was a dangerous and insidious drug. Addiction was rampant, and the long-term effects were devastating. Constant use could lead to a whole host of problems, including constipation, lethargy, and, eventually, death. And, as if that wasn't bad enough, withdrawal could be a truly horrific experience. Imagine the worst flu you've ever had, multiplied by 10, and then add a healthy dose of existential dread. Not fun. Now, historians still argue whether the Victorian era was truly as opium-soaked as we often imagine. Some claim that its use was exaggerated, that it was confined to certain social groups or geographical areas. Others point to the sheer volume of opium being imported and sold, suggesting that it was a much more pervasive problem. It's a tough question to answer definitively, as records are often incomplete or biased. You know how it is, historians. They can't even agree on the color of a dress in a Renaissance painting, let alone the social impact of a widespread drug addiction. And let's not forget the Opium Wars, a series of conflicts between Britain and China in the 19th century. Basically, the British were smuggling opium into China on a massive scale, and the Chinese government tried to stop them. The British, naturally, responded with military force, because apparently global domination is totally worth ruining the health of an entire nation. The Opium Wars were a dark chapter in history, a testament to the destructive power of greed and the devastating consequences of addiction. It's funny how it's called war, but it was more like aggressive drug dealing. What's next? The cocaine crusade. Okay, a quick break for a lighthearted joke. What do you call an opium poppy that tells lies? A poppycock. I know, I'll see myself out. Now, despite the growing awareness of opium's dangers, it continued to be widely used well into the 20th century. It wasn't until the development of safer and more effective pain relievers that its popularity finally began to wane. Even then, opium-based drugs like morphine and codeine remained important tools in medicine, and they still are today, albeit under much stricter regulation. So it goes to show that sometimes the things that harm us are the very same that help us. Or perhaps, it just speaks to the complicated ways in which human beings respond to pain. But think about it, that dusty road, that apothecary, the siren's song of sweet relief. It was a different world, a world where opium held a powerful sway over people's lives. A world where the cure was often as dangerous as the disease. And as you turn away from that apothecary, a little wiser and perhaps a little more grateful for modern medicine, you can't help but wonder what remedies we blindly trust in today that, in a century's time, will seem just as misguided, just as dangerous, just as, well, poppycock. Sleep well. All right, settle in, friend. Just, nestle into that comfy chair, maybe dim the lights a little bit. We're going to keep tracing the ever so twisty, ever so sleepy path of recreational and medical sedation, and this time, we're wading neck-deep into the murky waters of chloral hydrate. Doesn't that sound refreshing? You trudge, yes you, weary traveler of the digital age, through the swirling mists of the late 19th century. Doctors, bless their cotton socks and questionable facial hair, are wrestling with a rather persistent problem: how to knock people out, reliably, without accidentally kicking the bucket in the process. Ether's a bit explosive, what with its, shall we say, flammable tendencies. And chloroform, while efficient, has a distressing habit of, well, stopping hearts. So, naturally, the medical world is clamoring for something, safer star. Enter chloral hydrate. Synthesized in 1869 by German chemist Oskar Liebrecht. Yes, I know, the year is screaming cowboy. It quickly gains traction as a sedative and hypnotic. Now, on paper, it sounds absolutely delightful. It's supposed to be less likely to cause the, unpleasant side effects of its predecessors. You swallow a dose, you drift off to a peaceful slumber, you wake up feeling refreshed allegedly. It's the allegedly that keeps things interesting, isn't it? You see, chloral hydrate, or knockout drops, as it became affectionately known in less than reputable circles, is metabolized by the liver into trichloroethanol. Now, trichloroethanol is where the magic, or rather, the mischief, happens. It's a powerful central nervous system depressant. In layman's terms, it slows everything down: your breathing, your heart rate, your cognitive function. Basically, it turns you into a particularly slow-moving, slightly drooling version of yourself. Think of it as the digital equivalent of dial-up internet, but for your brain. And like dial-up, it's easy to overestimate the amount needed for desired results. And just like some people are convinced they can hear the dial-up modem song, some people are convinced chloral hydrate tastes delicious. It does not. It has a distinctly pungent odor and a rather bitter taste. Masking it requires a good deal of skill and, let's be honest, probably a hefty dose of sugar. That's why it found its way into drinks more often than, say, a bland bowl of porridge. You might be picturing a scene straight out of a Victorian melodrama, a shadowy figure slipping a few drops into an unsuspecting victim's drink. And honestly, you wouldn't be far off. Chloral hydrate quickly earned a reputation as a tool for, well, let's just say it was used in situations that didn't always involve medical professionals in starched white coats. Think back-alley gambling dens and other less than savory establishments. In fact, its reputation was so widespread that it seeped into the popular lexicon. The phrase Mickey Finn, referring to a drink laced with a substance to incapacitate someone, is believed to originate from a Chicago bartender of the same name who allegedly specialized in serving chloral hydrate-laced beverages to unruly patrons. I hope he at least gave them free peanuts. It's worth remembering, though, that chloral hydrate wasn't exclusively the province of shady characters. Doctors genuinely believed they had found a safer alternative to the more volatile anesthetics of the time. Queen Victoria herself was reportedly prescribed chloral hydrate to combat insomnia. Talk about royal treatment. Imagine a queen drowsing off with the help of the same stuff that's knocking out gamblers in Chicago. And that, my friend, is where the problem truly lies. The line between legitimate medical use and outright abuse was, shall we say, rather blurred. The dosage window between effective sedation and potentially fatal overdose is surprisingly narrow. Add to that the fact that chloral hydrate can interact dangerously with other substances, particularly alcohol, and you've got yourself a recipe for disaster. It's a bit like trying to bake a cake using both baking soda and baking powder. You might get something edible, but it's far more likely to end in a volcanic eruption of batter. You sit there, considering all this, and you might start to feel a little uneasy, which is understandable. The history of chloral hydrate is a potent reminder that even well-intentioned medical advancements can be easily misused, and that the pursuit of easy answers to complex problems can often lead down a dark and dangerous path. And also that even queens aren't immune to a bad night's sleep. But the story doesn't end there. Despite its dangers and checkered past, chloral hydrate clung to its spot in the medical toolkit. Why? Because, in certain specific situations, it actually worked. It was particularly useful for sedating children before medical procedures, or for managing delirium tremens in alcohol withdrawal. It was a quick fix, a temporary solution to a pressing problem. And in the fast-paced world of medicine, sometimes that's all that matters. You see, chloral hydrate, for all its flaws, offered a level of predictability that other sedatives of the time simply couldn't match. It was relatively easy to administer, and its effects were generally consistent. Of course, generally is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. It's the same generally you use when you generally do the dishes right after dinner. We all know how that plays out. There's a quirky side note to all this too. Have you ever heard of Mickey Spillane's fictional detective, Mike Hammer? The hard-boiled, two-fisted, vaguely sociopathic hero? Well, he had a penchant for using chloral hydrate, often in the form of knockout drops, to subdue his enemies. I suppose if you're battling gangsters and commies on a regular basis, a little chemical assistance is understandable. You know, for relaxation. Historians still argue whether the popular perception of chloral hydrate's dangers was overblown, fueled by sensationalized media reports and moral panic, or if it was a legitimate threat lurking in every dimly lit corner. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in the middle. Chloral hydrate was a powerful and potentially dangerous substance, but its widespread use also made it an easy target for fearmongering and exaggeration. Think of it as the 19th century equivalent of those clickbait articles warning about the dangers of toxic household cleaners. You find yourself contemplating the blurry lines between medicine, recreation, and outright malice. Chloral hydrate was all three, a chameleon substance that adapted to the needs and desires of whoever wielded it. It's a somber thought, isn't it? How easily something intended to heal can be twisted into something that harms. It's like that well-meaning relative who always gives you helpful advice that somehow manages to make you feel worse. So, where does chloral hydrate stand today? Well, it's certainly not the ubiquitous sedative it once was. Safer, more predictable alternatives have largely taken its place. But it hasn't vanished entirely. It's still used in certain niche applications, particularly for pediatric sedation. Although, let's be honest, you're probably more likely to encounter it in a dusty old textbook than in a modern hospital. Which, all things considered, is probably for the best. You let that thought sink in, the weight of history pressing down on you like a particularly heavy blanket. The world of sedation is a strange and ever-evolving landscape, filled with both promise and peril. And chloral hydrate, with its checkered past and lingering presence, serves as a potent reminder of the complex and often contradictory nature of medical progress. Remember, friend, it's always good to be wary of magic bullets and sure things, especially when you're offered one in a darkened alleyway. All right, pull up a blanket, maybe grab a warm beverage. Chamomile's overrated, but hey, you do you. Let's dive deeper into the murky and sometimes downright bizarre history of chasing sleep. Last time, we talked poppies and booze, the OGs of Dreamland Express. But what happens when you wanted something a little more scientific? Now, imagine you're Victorian. Not that hard, right? Just picture yourself perpetually itchy in wool undergarments. You're stressed. The Industrial Revolution is chugging along. The air is thick with coal dust, and the concept of downtime is something only the landed gentry can afford. You can't sleep. So what do? Enter the bromides. You see them advertised everywhere, these miracle cures for nervousness and insomnia. You can find them in patent medicines with names like Dr. So-and-so's Nerve Tonic or Mother Watch-Surface Soothing Syrup. Sounds legit, right? Bromides were simple chemical compounds containing, you guessed it, bromine. They depressed the central nervous system, slowing everything down. And they worked. Sort of. They definitely made you less you. You take a swig of the tonic, and a few minutes later, a warm fuzziness creeps over you. Your anxieties begin to fade, replaced by a sense of blissful detachment. The incessant clatter of the nearby factory fades into a dull hum. The world softens. Sleep comes easily. Oh, of course, there's a catch. There's always a catch, isn't there? Prolonged bromide use leads to something charmingly called bromism. Think of it as a slow, creeping fog that descends on your brain. Symptoms range from mild skin rashes and digestive problems to, well, let's just say severe neurological and psychological issues. Slurred speech, tremors, hallucinations, paranoia, the whole shebang. And get this, one of the key indicators was persistent, almost comical acne outbreaks. Can you imagine trying to get a good night's rest when your face feels like a topographical map of a volcanic region? Bromism could be so severe it landed people in asylums, their minds effectively pickled in bromine. You might be wondering, how on earth did they not realize this was happening? Well, medical science wasn't exactly rocket science back then, and many doctors, some might say a bit maliciously, were more than happy to prescribe these cures without fully understanding the long-term consequences. And here's the truly messed up part. Bromides were sometimes used to control patients within those very asylums. It's like using gasoline to put out a fire. In fact, historians still argue whether the widespread use of bromides contributed to the overcrowding and poor conditions in mental institutions during that era. Were people truly mentally ill, or were they just really bromide? Now, let's fast forward a bit. Bromides eventually fell out of favor as newer, more nuanced. We use that word loosely, sedatives came onto the scene. But their legacy lingers. You can still find potassium bromide used in veterinary medicine, mostly as an anticonvulsant for dogs with epilepsy. So, if you ever wondered what that little pill you're giving Fido is, well, now you know. He might just be having the most chill seizure of his life. Joke's on you, Fido. Okay, so bromides were a bust. What else did our ancestors dream up in their quest for slumber? The answer, my friend, is a chemical cocktail of epic proportions. You stumble upon a newspaper ad boasting of a revolutionary new sleep aid, chloral hydrate. Touted as a safe and effective alternative to opium, it quickly gained popularity in the late 19th century. Chemist Justus von Liebig, while experimenting with various chemicals, accidentally created chloral hydrate. The story goes that he initially dismissed it as unimportant, but thankfully for all of us sleepless souls, others saw its potential. You decide to give it a try. You mix the prescribed dose with water. It smells faintly of chlorine and disappointment, but you persevere. Down the hatch. Within minutes, a wave of tranquility washes over you. Your muscles relax, your mind quiets, and you drift off into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, here's the catch, and you probably saw this one coming, right? Chloral hydrate, while effective, was also highly addictive and potentially dangerous. Overdoses could lead to respiratory depression, coma, and even death. And just like bromides, prolonged use could cause a whole host of unpleasant side effects, including liver damage, gastrointestinal problems, and, you guessed it, neurological issues. Seriously, you'd think someone would have figured out the brain doesn't like being messed with at this point. But the dangers didn't stop people from using it. Chloral hydrate became a favorite among artists, writers, and other creative types seeking to unlock their imaginations or simply escape the stresses of daily life. It was even rumored to be a favorite of Queen Victoria, who supposedly used it to combat her insomnia. Imagine the Queen of England, ruler of a vast empire, drifting off to sleep fueled by a slightly shady chemical compound. It's almost punk rock. And here's a particularly grim tidbit. Chloral hydrate also gained notoriety as a Mickey Fin, a substance secretly slipped into someone's drink to incapacitate them. The exact composition of a Mickey Fin varied, but chloral hydrate was often a key ingredient, used to render unsuspecting victims unconscious for nefarious purposes. So, yeah, not exactly the most wholesome sleep aid. Historians still argue about the exact role of chloral hydrate in shaping artistic movements and social dynamics of the time. Did it unleash creativity, or did it simply numb people into a state of compliant apathy? Was it a boon to insomniacs, or a tool for exploitation? The answer, as always, is probably somewhere in the murky middle. But you know, it wasn't just bromides and chloral hydrate. The early 20th century was a veritable Wild West of pharmaceutical experimentation. There were barbiturates, powerful sedatives that quickly became both popular and problematic. You had paraldehyde, a foul-smelling liquid that was so effective at inducing sleep that people were willing to overlook its distinctive aroma. Apparently, it smelled so bad that even doctors had trouble stomaching it. The things people will do for a good night's rest, eh? And let's not forget the various concoctions marketed directly to children. Soothing syrups, containing alcohol and opiates were commonly used to quiet fussy babies, often with tragic consequences. Infant mortality rates were appalling during this period, and it's likely that these dangerous tonics played a significant role. One ad famously boasted of its product curing everything from teething pain to, well, pretty much anything that ailed a child. And the secret ingredient? Morphine. Sweet dreams, little ones. Forever. It's a sobering reminder that the quest for easy sleep can sometimes lead down a dark and dangerous path. But don't worry, it's all in the past. You're safe and sound in the 21st century, surrounded by, well, arguably safer and more effective, but still potentially problematic, sleep aids. And you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20ths. So, before you reach for that next sleeping pill, maybe take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. Or maybe just try counting sheep. Unless you're allergic to wool, of course. That would be just your luck. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's dim the lights a little, fluff those pillows, and maybe grab a cup of chamomile tea. We're diving deep tonight into a world of dubious promises, murky ingredients, and the sweet, siren song of sleep. You know that feeling, right? The one where the day just won't quit? The thoughts swirling, the body buzzing, the Sandman seemingly on permanent vacation? Well, imagine that, but amplified by the stresses of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Industrialization was chugging along, cities were exploding with new arrivals, and life was just plain noisy. People were desperate for a way to quiet the clamor, to find a little peace and quiet in their own minds. Enter the glorious, slightly terrifying, world of patent medicines. You trudge home after a grueling 12-hour shift in a factory, the air thick with coal dust and the echoes of machinery. Every muscle aches. Your mind races with anxieties about bills and family. You see a brightly colored poster plastered to a brick wall. Dr. So-and-so's elixir, guaranteed to cure nervous exhaustion and promote restful sleep. A smiling woman, radiating serenity, gazes back at you. Tempting, isn't it? After all, what could possibly go wrong? Here's the thing. These medicines weren't exactly subject to rigorous testing. Or any testing, really. They were often concoctions of questionable ingredients, marketed with wildly exaggerated claims, and sold directly to the public. Think of it like the Wild West of wellness, but with more laudanum and less gunfighting. Although, come to think of it, some of those ingredients were probably just as likely to knock you out. Now, a historical fact to chew on: patent medicines were a huge business. We're talking millions of dollars, fueled by clever advertising and a public eager for quick fixes. Some of the most successful brands became household names, their jingles echoing in the minds of generations. Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound. Anyone? Probably not, unless you're a fan of turn-of-the-century menstrual remedies. But let's get to the real juicy stuff, the stuff that made these sleep aids so effective. You see, many of them contain significant doses of alcohol, morphine, or opium, which, you know, will knock you out. It's a bit like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. But hey, at least you're getting some sleep, right? And maybe a little bit addicted. Imagine you're a traveling salesman. The railroads crisscross the country, opening up new markets, but the constant travel is exhausting. You spend your nights in cramped, noisy hotels, trying to close deals and make a living. A bottle of Dr. Soother's syrup, a popular concoction aimed at fussy babies, yes, babies, is marketed as a solution for your own insomnia. A few swigs and boom, you're out like a light. Never mind that it contains enough morphine to tranquilize a small elephant. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of these patent medicine manufacturers were surprisingly savvy marketers. They employed all sorts of tactics, from endorsements by, allegedly, satisfied customers to elaborate promotional giveaways. One company even offered a free portrait with every purchase. Talk about a sleep-inducing sales pitch. Buy our miracle cure and get a blurry likeness of yourself. What could be better? Historians still argue whether the consumers of these patent medicines were blissfully ignorant or desperately hopeful, but the reality is likely a mix of both. People were often desperate for relief, and the claims made by these products were incredibly alluring. And in a time before strict regulations, it was all too easy to get away with peddling snake oil. Literally, in some cases, if the rumors about some of the ingredients are to be believed. But it wasn't all malicious intent, at least not entirely. Some manufacturers genuinely believed in the efficacy of their products, even if the science behind them was, shall we say, a little shaky. It was a different time, a time when faith in traditional remedies and folk medicine was still strong. And hey, sometimes a placebo effect can be just as powerful as the real thing. Just maybe not when the placebo is pure, unadulterated opium. Picture this. You're a young woman struggling with female complaints, a vague term that could encompass anything from menstrual cramps to garden-variety anxiety. The ads for Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound promise to cure all your woes, to restore your vitality, and make you a happy, productive member of society. And who wouldn't want that? You buy a bottle, dutifully follow the instructions, and, well, you probably feel a little better. Maybe it's the alcohol, maybe it's the herbs, maybe it's just the placebo effect. But for a little while, at least, the world seems a little brighter. Another historical nugget for you. The rise of patent medicines played a significant role in the development of advertising as an industry. These companies were some of the earliest and most aggressive advertisers, pioneering techniques that are still used today. Catchy slogans, celebrity endorsements, before and after photos, they used it all. They were the Instagram influencers of their day, just with more questionable ethics and fewer filters. Now, for a lighthearted joke, why did the patent medicine cross the road? To prove its claims were effective on both sides. I know, I'll see myself out. Of course, the party couldn't last forever. As scientific understanding grew and consumer protection movements gained momentum, the tide began to turn against patent medicines. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was a major turning point, requiring manufacturers to list the ingredients of their products on the label. This made it a lot harder to hide the fact that your miracle cure was mostly just alcohol and a dash of opium. Suddenly, Dr. So-and-so's elixir didn't sound quite so appealing. Imagine being the marketing executive responsible for trying to spin the new, transparent labeling laws in a positive light. Yes, our product contains 40% alcohol, but think of it as internal antiseptic. It's cleaning your insides while you sleep. Good luck with that pitch. But even with regulations in place, the legacy of patent medicines lingered. People still craved quick fixes and easy solutions, and the advertising industry was more than happy to oblige. The focus shifted from blatant deception to more subtle forms of persuasion, but the underlying message remained the same. Buy this product, and your problems will disappear. Here's a quirky fact. Some of the brand names from the patent medicine era are still around today, although the products themselves have, thankfully, been reformulated. So, the next time you see a bottle of cough syrup with a vaguely old-timey label, take a moment to appreciate the history behind it. And maybe check the ingredients list before you take a swig. You see, the story of patent medicines is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a cautionary tale about the power of marketing, the vulnerability of consumers, and the enduring human desire for a good night's sleep. It's a reminder that sometimes the best remedies are the simplest ones: a warm bath, a quiet room, and maybe a good book. And definitely not a bottle full of morphine. Historians still argue whether the patent medicine era was a uniquely exploitative period or simply a reflection of the unregulated capitalism of the time. But one thing is certain: it was a wild ride, filled with colorful characters, dubious claims, and enough questionable ingredients to keep you up all night. Which, ironically, is the very thing they were supposed to prevent. And now, as the moon hangs high in the sky, it's time for me to say goodnight. May your dreams be sweet, your sleep be restful, and your medicine cabinet be free of anything that sounds even remotely like elixir. Okay, settle in, because we're diving deep today, deep into the twitchy, suggestive waters of electrotherapy and hypnotism. Yeah, sounds like a Victorian carnival act, doesn't it? And, well, sometimes it was. But there's a whole lot more bubbling beneath the surface. So, dim the lights, maybe grab a weighted blanket, and let's get started. You trudge through the rain-slicked streets of London, gas lamps casting fuzzy halos in the gloom. It's 1880-something, and you're on your way to see a doctor. Not just any doctor, mind you, but a doctor specializing in nervous disorders. You've been feeling a bit off, restless, anxious, perhaps a touch hysterical. Don't worry, dear, it's a common affliction among the refined ladies of the era, and honestly, sometimes just being alive in general. You could go to a regular physician, of course, and get prescribed some laudable pus or heroin cough syrup, but where is the fun in that? As you enter the doctor's office, the smell of ozone hangs heavy in the air. It's an unusual fragrance, sharp and clean, hinting at the technological marvels within. You're ushered into a waiting room, and as you wait, you notice a peculiar device sitting on a table. It's a bulky contraption of brass and glass, with wires snaking out like metallic tentacles. This, my friend, is a Faradic battery, a marvel of its time. It's also the star of our first act, Electrotherapy. Now, the principle behind electrotherapy, as it was understood then, was deceptively simple. It involved running a mild electrical current through the body to stimulate nerves and muscles. This, supposedly, could cure everything from headaches and insomnia to paralysis and, well, you name it. Victorian doctors were enthusiastic, but it's not like their other treatments were effective. They were just as likely to put a leech on your forehead. The idea was that electricity somehow rebalanced the body's vital energies, a concept that was vaguely scientific sounding but, in retrospect, closer to magic than medicine. You settle onto the plush leather chair in the treatment room, a mix of trepidation and morbid curiosity swirling within you. The doctor, a portly man with a walrus mustache and a twinkle in his eye, explains the procedure. He attaches electrodes to your temples, your wrists, and maybe even other, more private areas, depending on what ails you. You steel yourself. And then, *buzz star. A mild tingling sensation washes over you. It's not exactly painful, but it's definitely noticeable. The current ebbs and flows, and you find yourself focusing intently on the strange, rhythmic pulsing. You could probably get the same effect using a TINS machine from Walgreens. Did it work? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For some people, maybe. The placebo effect is a powerful thing, especially when you're convinced you're undergoing cutting-edge treatment. The tingling sensation might have been distracting enough to ease some anxiety, or the attention from the doctor could have been therapeutic in itself. But for others, it was likely just a waste of time and money. Still, electrotherapy enjoyed a period of popularity, even finding its way into beauty salons, where it was used to rejuvenate the skin. Imagine getting zapped into youthfulness. Mainstream historical fact: electricity was a relatively new and exciting field in the 19th century, and doctors were eager to explore its potential applications. It was seen as a powerful force that could unlock the secrets of the human body. Quirky tidbit: one popular application of electrotherapy was to treat hysteria in women, often involving the use of a vibrator powered by electricity. Yes, really. So, next time someone tries to mansplain something, just tell them to go electrocute themselves, medically speaking. Historians still argue whether electrotherapy was truly effective or just another example of quackery. Some argue that it provided genuine relief for some patients, while others dismiss it as a misguided fad based on faulty science. Now, let's transition smoothly, seamlessly, almost hypnotically, into our second act: hypnotism. You see, while you were getting zapped, other doctors were exploring the power of suggestion. And not just suggestion, but hypnotic suggestion. Imagine this. You're in a dimly lit room, lying on a comfortable couch. A soothing voice guides you deeper and deeper into relaxation. Your eyelids grow heavy, your muscles loosen, and your mind begins to drift. You are now in a trance. Or are you? That depends on who you ask. Hypnotism, or mesmerism, as it was sometimes called, had its roots in the work of Franz Mesmer, an 18th-century German physician who believed in animal magnetism, a kind of universal life force that could be manipulated to heal the sick. His methods were controversial, to say the least, often involving elaborate theatrical performances and the passing of magnets over patients' bodies. It was kind of like the Victorian era's equivalent of a YouTube influencer hawking magnetic bracelets. As the practice evolved, the magnets were dropped, and the focus shifted to the power of suggestion. Doctors discovered that by putting patients in a trance-like state, they could influence their thoughts, feelings, and even their behavior. This could be used to treat a wide range of conditions, from pain and phobias to addiction and, well, you guessed it, hysteria. You submit to the hypnotist's gentle guidance, your mind a blank canvas ready to be painted with his words. He suggests that your anxiety is melting away, that your pain is disappearing, that you are becoming calm. And surprisingly, it works. At least for a while. The power of suggestion can be remarkably potent, especially when you're already predisposed to believe in it. It's like when you go to one of those mindfulness retreats and your anxiety is gone for the day, only to return once you realize that you have to pay your taxes. But just as with electrotherapy, the effectiveness of hypnotism was, and still is, a subject of debate. Some doctors swore by it, while others dismissed it as a form of trickery or charlatanism. And let's be honest, there were plenty of charlatans eager to exploit the public's fascination with the mysterious power of the mind. Imagine a traveling salesman peddling hypnotic elixirs that promised to cure all your ills. Hypnotism also faced scrutiny due to its association with stage shows and parlor games. People were hypnotizing their friends to cluck like chickens and bark like dogs, which hardly inspired confidence in its therapeutic potential. It was like if all doctors were also amateur magicians. Mainstream historical fact: hypnotism gained legitimacy in the late 19th century, thanks to the work of neurologists like Jean-Martin Charcot, who used it to study and treat hysteria. He even famously demonstrated it at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, showcasing the power of suggestion to an audience of captivated onlookers. Quirky tidbit: some early hypnotists believed that they could use hypnotism to communicate with the dead, leading to a surge in seances and spiritualist practices. They were trying to call the ghosts, but they were getting voicemail. Historians still argue whether hypnotism is a genuine therapeutic tool or merely a psychological phenomenon with limited practical applications. Some point to its proven effectiveness in managing pain and anxiety, while others remain skeptical of its broader claims. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the bizarre and fascinating world of electrotherapy and hypnotism. Two treatments that were once considered cutting-edge, yet now seem like relics of a bygone era. They're a reminder that medicine is always evolving, and that what we believe to be true today may be disproven tomorrow. So, next time you feel a little off, maybe think twice before reaching for the nearest Faraday battery or hypnotist's couch. Or don't. Who am I to judge? It's always better to experiment than to follow a herd, so don't follow us. We are just two weirdo YouTubers, anyway. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's dim those gas lamps and pull the velvet curtains tight, because tonight, we're diving deep into the delightful, utterly exhausting world of Victorian sleep, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. Imagine, if you will, you're transported back to the 19th century. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones replaces the drone of traffic. The aroma of coal smoke stings your nostrils instead of exhaust fumes. Are you relaxed yet? No? Well, let's get started. You trudge home after a grueling 14-hour workday at the factory. The air, thick with soot and the ever-present tang of, well, let's just say unmentionables, clings to your threadbare clothes. Remember, this isn't a charming Dickens novel for you. This is your existence. The Industrial Revolution might be making a few folks rich, but you're mainly just getting richer in grime. One mainstream historical fact is that child labor was rampant, particularly in factories and mines. But hey, at least it gave those youngsters some character-building experiences. Reaching your cramped tenement, you navigate a narrow staircase reeking of cabbage and despair. Inside, your family awaits. Or, more accurately, a collection of weary bodies crammed into a single room. This room is your kitchen, your bedroom, your living room, your everything. Privacy? That's a luxury reserved for the landed gentry and perhaps your cat, if you have one. Finding a clean space to even think about sleeping is already a challenge. The idea of a consistent bedtime routine? Forget about it. Your days are dictated by the factory whistle, a piercing shriek that governs your life. When it blows, you work. When it stops, you collapse. There's no wind-down period, no soothing lavender bath, no chamomile tea. Instead, you have a shared wash basin, cold water, and the nagging feeling that you should probably scrub a little harder, but you're just so tired. And speaking of tiredness, your bed is likely a straw-filled mattress shared with at least one sibling and possibly a few unwelcome bedbug roommates. Let's be honest, it's more of a glorified sack of itchy hay. Historians still argue whether the squalor of Victorian cities was a result of negligence or simply an unavoidable consequence of rapid industrialization. Whatever the cause, it certainly wasn't conducive to a good night's sleep. Now, let's talk about light, or rather, the lack thereof. While the upper classes could afford gas lighting, albeit a flickering, smelly version, you rely on candles or oil lamps. These cast a dim, uneven glow, hardly conducive to the production of melatonin, your body's natural sleep hormone. Try reading a book by candlelight. It is like trying to perform open-heart surgery with a rusty spoon. Plus, the open flame presents a constant fire hazard. Sleep soundly knowing that could happen at any time. That's relaxing, right? And don't even get me started on noise. The cacophony of the Victorian city never truly stops. Cries of street vendors hawking their wares, the clatter of carriages, the drunken brawls erupting in the nearby pub. It's a constant assault on your ears. Forget white noise. You're dealing with the full orchestra of urban chaos. Even if you somehow manage to drift off despite the discomfort, the smell, and the noise, your worries keep you on edge. You fret about losing your job, feeding your family, paying the rent. The Victorian era was not exactly a stress-free paradise. Unemployment was a constant threat, and a single illness could plunge a family into abject poverty. Historians still argue whether such poverty was a systematic issue or an individual responsibility. All I know is, I would definitely lose sleep over it. Furthermore, think about diet. Your meals consist primarily of cheap, filling foods like bread, potatoes, and the occasional hunk of fatty meat if you're lucky. Processed foods as we know them didn't exist, But that doesn't mean your diet was healthy. Malnutrition was rampant, and vitamin deficiencies were common. A quirky tidbit for you. Some historians suggest that the prevalence of rickets, caused by vitamin D deficiency, contributed to sleep disturbances in children. And then, there are the clothes. You probably wore the same layers of heavy, restrictive clothing all day and all night. Corsets for women were particularly problematic, restricting breathing and circulation. It's hard to relax when you feel like you're being slowly squeezed to death by a whalebone cage. Men weren't immune either. Waistcoats and tight collars could be equally uncomfortable. But it wasn't just the physical discomfort that kept Victorians awake. Their mental and emotional state played a significant role. The Victorian era was an age of intense social anxiety and moral codes. Repressed emotions, anxieties about social standing, and fears of damnation could all contribute to sleepless nights. Remember, spiritualism was becoming incredibly popular. Seances, mediums, and ghost stories were all the rage. Now, I'm not saying that a good ghost story can't be entertaining, but imagine lying in your rickety bed, listening to the floorboards creak, and wondering if you're sharing your room with a spectral visitor. Sweet dreams, right? Another quirky thing that happened was the widespread use of patent medicines. Many of these concoctions contained significant amounts of alcohol or even opiates. While they might have provided temporary relief from insomnia, they were highly addictive and could lead to a whole host of other health problems. Basically, it was like trading one nightmare for another. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with etiquette and social norms was a genuine reflection of moral values or a facade masking widespread hypocrisy. Either way, the pressure to conform must have been immense. Every little thing was judged. And let's not forget about disease. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid fever, these were constant threats. Living in close quarters with poor sanitation meant that infectious diseases spread rapidly. A persistent cough, a raging fever, a crippling pain. These were common occurrences that could rob you of your sleep. Think about it. Just the worry about those things was enough to keep you up at night. And here's the kicker. Many Victorians believed that sleep was a sign of weakness. They thought that wasting time in bed was unproductive and lazy. It was a stiff upper lip kind of era, and sleep was considered a bit self-indulgent. You were expected to push through, no matter how tired you were. As a result, they didn't really care about what they needed to get a good night's sleep, which made matters worse. So, there you have it, friend. A glimpse into the Victorian world of sleep deprivation. Now, as you curl up in your comfortable bed, surrounded by silence and darkness, take a moment to appreciate the simple luxury of a good night's rest. Because for our Victorian counterparts, sleep was a rare and precious commodity. All right, pull up a comfy chair, maybe grab a lavender sachet. We're diving deep into the Victorian era's best and, most interesting, advice on how to eat and drink your way to dreamland. Yeah, forget the melatonin gummies for now. We're going full-on gaslight age on this one. Imagine you're a weary London clerk, shuffling home after a long day hunched over ledgers in a dimly lit office. The smog clings to your throat, the noise of horse-drawn carriages still rings in your ears, and the only thing you crave is a decent night's sleep. But alas, slumber eludes you. What's a sleep-deprived Victorian to do? Well, consult the popular health manuals of the time, of course. Now, the Victorians were obsessed with digestion. Absolutely obsessed. They believed that a good night's sleep was intrinsically linked to a well-functioning stomach. If your stomach was unhappy, you were basically doomed to tossing and turning. So, what did they recommend you put into this all-important digestive engine before bed? Warm milk was a classic, of course. A soothing cup of warm milk, perhaps laced with a little nutmeg, was thought to calm the nerves and promote relaxation. It's still a pretty solid choice today, I have to admit. But if you were feeling a little fancy, you might opt for a glass of something a bit stronger. A small glass of sherry or port was often prescribed as a nightcap. The alcohol, it was believed, would help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Of course, we now know that alcohol, while it might initially make you drowsy, can actually disrupt your sleep cycle later on. But hey, who are we to judge the Victorians? They didn't have TikTok to keep them up at night, just, rampant industrialization and the fear of cholera. And speaking of what to avoid, heavy suppers were a definite no-no. The Victorians believed that overloading your stomach before bed would lead to indigestion, nightmares, and a generally restless night. Think about it. Your body is working overtime to digest all that food instead of focusing on, well, sleeping. Instead, a light, easily digestible meal was recommended. Something like a bowl of broth or a small piece of toast. Maybe even a water biscuit, if you were feeling particularly daring. Now, the water biscuit wasn't exactly a culinary masterpiece, but it was bland and easy to digest, which was the whole point. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with digestion was rooted in genuine health concerns or a reflection of deeper anxieties about control and order in a rapidly changing world. What do you think? The Victorians, you see, were also deeply concerned with the quality of their food and drink. Adulteration was rampant. Milk was often diluted with water, sometimes from questionable sources, and sugar was sometimes mixed with sand. So, if you wanted a truly restful night, you had to make sure that what you were consuming was pure and unadulterated. Otherwise, who knows what sort of digestive havoc it might wreak. Now, let's talk about some of the more interesting remedies for insomnia. One popular belief was that wearing socks to bed could help you sleep. The idea was that warming your feet would improve circulation and promote relaxation, which, actually, isn't totally crazy. Warming your feet can help you fall asleep faster. So, maybe the Victorians were onto something there. Then there was the slightly more unusual practice of sleeping with hops. Yes, hops, as in the stuff they used to make beer. People would stuff pillows with hops, believing that the aroma would have a calming effect. It's not entirely unfounded, by the way. Hops do contain compounds that can promote relaxation. The Victorians also had some pretty specific ideas about what to eat to avoid nightmares. They believed that eating cheese before bed could cause vivid and disturbing dreams. This belief was so widespread that it even made its way into popular literature. Ebenezer Scrooge famously blames his vision of Jacob Marley on a crumb of cheese. It's funny how these things stick, isn't it? I bet some people still avoid cheese before bed, just in case. And then there were the more, shall we say, out there cures for insomnia. Some people believed that wearing a specific type of gemstone could help you sleep. Others swore by the power of herbal remedies, concoctions with ingredients like valerian root, chamomile, and skullcap. Look, I'm not knocking herbal remedies entirely, but some of the Victorian recipes were intense. You really had to trust your apothecary. Back then, apothecaries were less pharmacy tech at CVS and more mystical wizard with a mortar and pestle. Of course, not all Victorian advice was medically sound, to put it mildly. Some doctors recommended bloodletting as a cure for insomnia. Yes, bloodletting, as in draining blood from your body. The idea was that it would somehow balance your humors and restore harmony to your system. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would just make you feel weak and lightheaded. Definitely not conducive to a good night's sleep. Although, perhaps the shock of having your blood drained would knock you out. Historians still argue whether the popularity of bloodletting in the Victorian era was due to genuine belief in its efficacy or simply a lack of better medical alternatives. But let's not be too hard on the Victorians. They were, after all, trying to make sense of the world with the knowledge and resources they had available to them. And, in some cases, their advice wasn't entirely off base. Warm milk, light suppers, and a focus on relaxation are all still pretty good strategies for promoting sleep. Just maybe skip the bloodletting, okay? I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but you never know. All right, settle in, friend. Let's tiptoe into the Victorian bedroom. Imagine it. You trudge up a creaking staircase, the gaslight flickering low, casting long, dancing shadows. You pause outside the door, the heavy scent of lavender and beeswax polish hanging in the air. This isn't just a room. It's a sanctuary, a statement, a stage set for approximately 8 hours of unconsciousness. You turn the ornate brass knob, feeling its cool smoothness against your palm. You step inside. Immediately, you're enveloped. Not just by the scent, but by the stuff. Oh, the stuff. Think layers upon layers. Curtains upon curtains. Rugs upon rugs. Drapes upon drapes. It's the Victorian equivalent of a weighted blanket. Except instead of just feeling secure, you're also suffocating under the sheer weight of bourgeois aspiration. It's like a grandma's house, but amplified tenfold and permanently stuck in Christmas mode. The Victorians, you see, were big on insulation. And by insulation, I mean a near-paranoid obsession with keeping out drafts, noise, and pretty much any hint of the outside world. This stemmed from a very real fear of disease, fueled by outbreaks of cholera and tuberculosis. They believed that fresh air, while necessary in theory, could carry deadly miasmas, invisible poisonous vapors responsible for all sorts of ills. So, you batten down the hatches, and then you batten them down again, just to be sure. The bed, of course, is the star of the show. It's huge, probably a 4-poster affair, draped in heavy velvet or damask. Think less sleeping space and more architectural statement designed to showcase the family's wealth and respectability. The higher up the social ladder you climb, the more elaborate the bed becomes, culminating in positively Byzantine structures fit for a slumbering queen. It's less a bed, more a small building project. You gingerly pull back the layers of blankets, feeling the weight of each one. There's the wool blanket, the cotton sheet, the feather-filled quilt, and, because why not, maybe another blanket just for kicks. The Victorians believed in sleeping warm, bordering on sweltering. The idea was to sweat out any lingering impurities, a kind of nocturnal internal cleansing. Good luck breathing under all that. You might as well be trying to sleep inside a well-insulated Thanksgiving turkey. And what about the mattress itself? Probably stuffed with straw, horsehair, or even seaweed. Not exactly the memory foam paradise you might be used to. Comfort wasn't necessarily the priority. Practicality and cost were often more important. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep on a mattress filled with scratchy seaweed. It makes you appreciate that lumpy old futon you had in college, doesn't it? I wonder if anyone ever accidentally incubated a small crab on a seaweed mattress. Now, let's talk about color. Forget minimalist whites and soothing grays. The Victorian bedroom was all about rich, dark hues, deep reds, emerald greens, and inky blues. These colors were chosen not just for their aesthetic appeal, but also for their supposed health benefits. Dark colors were thought to absorb light and heat, creating a more calming and restful atmosphere. Plus, they hid dirt remarkably well. Gotta love a multitasking design choice. You might notice that the room is conspicuously devoid of, well, pretty much anything electronic. No TVs, no smartphones, no glowing screens to disrupt your sleep cycle. Imagine, just you, your seaweed mattress, and the faint glow of a gas lamp. It sounds almost peaceful, doesn't it? Of course, you'd probably be too busy worrying about cholera and scratching at your seaweed mattress to truly appreciate the serenity. But the quiet was intentional. The Victorian bedroom was a space for contemplation, for prayer, for marital relations, obviously. But decorum, dear friend, decorum. We shall not dwell on such matters. Suffice it to say, the bedroom served as a private sanctuary, a place to escape the prying eyes of society and indulge in a bit of personal introspection. Or, just sleep. You peer closer at the walls. Chances are they're covered in wallpaper. And not just any wallpaper. Elaborate, intricately patterned wallpaper, often featuring floral motifs, geometric designs, or even scenes from nature. The Victorians were obsessed with patterns, and wallpaper was the perfect way to indulge their obsession. It was also a surprisingly affordable way to add a touch of luxury to even the most modest home. One quirky tidbit: arsenic was a common ingredient in green wallpaper dye. That's right, you could be slowly poisoning yourself as you slept. The Victorians, bless their hearts, weren't always the best at understanding the long-term effects of their decorating choices. Ah yes, this wallpaper really brings out the death in decor. Historians still argue whether the Victorians were truly as prudish as they're often portrayed. On the one hand, they were obsessed with rules and etiquette, constantly fretting about social faux pas and the importance of maintaining appearances. On the other hand, they were also living, breathing human beings with the same desires and impulses as the rest of us. Maybe they were just really good at keeping their secrets. Or maybe not. Who knows? You spot a small table next to the bed, holding a few carefully chosen items. A porcelain wash basin and pitcher for a quick pre-sleep cleanse. A book of poetry for a bit of bedtime reading. And perhaps a small vial of laudanum, just in case you need a little extra help drifting off to sleep. Laudanum, an opium-based tincture, was a popular remedy for everything from insomnia to menstrual cramps. It's basically Victorian Xanax, but, with more opium. The lighting in the room is dim, usually provided by a single gas lamp or a flickering candle. The Victorians weren't big on bright lights, preferring a more subdued, intimate atmosphere. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was also a practical one. Gas lamps were expensive to operate, and candles could be a fire hazard. Plus, let's be honest, who wants to see every single dust bunny lurking under the bed? And there, tucked away in a corner, you might find a chamber pot. Because, indoor plumbing wasn't exactly ubiquitous in Victorian times. Let's just say that midnight trips to the outhouse weren't exactly a highlight of the Victorian sleeping experience. You definitely want to make sure you had a good pair of slippers and a warm dressing gown on hand. You take one last look around the room, absorbing all the details. The layers of fabric, the dark colors, the heavy furniture, the faint scent of lavender and arsenic. Just kidding, mostly. It's a world away from the minimalist bedrooms of today. It's cluttered, it's suffocating, it's undeniably Victorian. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on you, the accumulated dreams and anxieties of generations past. It's a strange and fascinating place, this Victorian bedroom. A place of rest, of reflection, and perhaps just a little bit of arsenic poisoning. And the moral of the story is? Be grateful for your memory foam mattress and your central heating. You've got it easy, my friend. You've got it easy. All right, settle in, friend. Let's talk about exercise. Yeah, I know. It sounds like the opposite of sleep, doesn't it? Like recommending a triple espresso before bed. But trust me, there's a method to this madness. We're diving into the sweaty, panting, sometimes smelly world of Victorian exercise and how it connects to that sweet slumber we're both craving. Imagine this. It's 1888. Jack the Ripper's running around, fog's thicker than pea soup, and you're doing calisthenics? Probably not. But the idea of exercise was starting to seep into the Victorian consciousness. You're probably thinking of stuffy drawing rooms and ladies fainting in corsets, but beneath the lace and whalebone, there was a burgeoning movement to get people moving. Think of it as the proto-Jimbro era, just with significantly less protein powder and a whole lot more mustaches. You see, the Victorians, for all their buttoned-up sensibilities, were becoming increasingly aware of the importance of physical health. The Industrial Revolution had dragged people from rural areas to smog-choked cities, forcing them into sedentary jobs. Suddenly, you weren't toiling in the fields all day. You were hunched over a desk, squinting at ledgers under flickering gaslight. This shift in lifestyle had some seriously nasty consequences, including a rise in, everything nasty, really. Aches, pains, digestive issues, and a general feeling of blah were rampant. And yes, even sleep problems. Historians still argue whether the rampant insomnia of the era was solely due to poor air quality and anxiety, or if a lack of physical activity played a significant role. So, what did they do about it? Well, you didn't exactly have Zumba classes. Instead, you might be persuaded to take up something like calisthenics. Think of it as the Victorian version of a Jane Fonda workout, except instead of leotards, you're wearing a high-neck dress and a serious expression. These exercises, often performed in groups, involved a lot of bending, stretching, and generally trying not to pass out from the sheer exertion of moving your limbs. And trust me, with those layers of clothing, just existing was a form of exercise. Another popular option was walking. Yes, walking. Before you roll your eyes, remember that this wasn't just a casual stroll to the corner store. This was serious, intentional walking. You'd bundle up in your warmest coat and hat, because, let's be real, Victorian winters were brutal, and set off for a brisk walk in the park. It was a chance to escape the grime of the city, breathe in some fresh-ish air, and maybe even spot a handsome gentleman or two. Imagine it as Victorian speed walking, but with more parasols. There's something truly delightful about the image of a gaggle of ladies, skirts rustling, determinately striding across Hyde Park. And let's not forget the rise of competitive sports. Cricket, rowing, and cycling became increasingly popular, not just for men, but also, to a lesser extent, for women. Queen Victoria herself was a fan of cycling, which I can only imagine involved a lot of panicked footmen running alongside her. But the burgeoning popularity of these activities highlighted a growing awareness of the importance of physical prowess and skill, which was not universally appreciated. Some doctors cautioned against the unfeminine effects of sport on women, warning that it could lead to, muscular development. Oh, the horror. The connection to sleep? Well, it wasn't always direct. The Victorians didn't have sleep trackers or scientific studies to tell them exactly how exercise impacted their sleep cycles. But they understood, intuitively, that physical activity could help to tire the body and calm the mind. A brisk walk in the afternoon could help to dispel the anxieties of the day and prepare you for a more restful night. Exhaustion was seen as a legitimate cure for insomnia, albeit a rather energetic one. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds lovely, but what about the working class? They were probably too busy working 16-hour shifts in factories to worry about their fitness. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But even among the working class, there was a growing awareness of the importance of physical activity. Working men's clubs often offered opportunities for exercise and sport, providing a much-needed outlet for physical and mental strain. Boxing, wrestling, and even simple games of football were popular ways to unwind after a long day of labor. And I bet they slept like babies afterwards. Metaphorically speaking, of course. I doubt Victorian babies were sleeping particularly well amidst the chaos and pollution. But here's the quirky tidbit. There was even a brief fascination with spiritual athleticism. The idea was that physical exercise could somehow enhance your spiritual well-being. You'd work on your physical body in tandem with your soul, hoping to achieve a state of enlightened fitness. It's like a Victorian version of yoga, but with more emphasis on the athleticism and less on the OM. Can you imagine lifting dumbbells while meditating about the inherent goodness of humanity? I'm picturing a very sweaty, very confused Victorian mystic. Now, let's bring it back to you. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, your mind racing with thoughts of deadlines, bills, and that awkward conversation you had with your boss earlier today. You might be tempted to reach for your phone, scroll endlessly through social media, and further agitate your already overworked brain. But maybe, just maybe, a little Victorian-inspired exercise is exactly what you need. You don't need to don a corset and take up competitive croquet. Start small. A brisk walk around the block. A few simple stretches before bed. Maybe even some light calisthenics if you're feeling particularly adventurous. The key is to find something that you enjoy and that doesn't feel like a chore. Because let's face it, if you're dreading it, you're not going to do it. And then you'll just be lying in bed, even more frustrated and wide awake. The Victorians, despite their societal constraints and lack of modern technology, understood something fundamental about the connection between body and mind. They knew that physical activity could be a powerful tool for managing stress, improving mood, and ultimately, promoting better sleep. So take a page from their book. Embrace the spirit of Victorian exercise. And who knows, maybe you'll finally be able to drift off into a peaceful, well-deserved slumber. Just try not to dream about Jack the Ripper. He's terrible for your sleep hygiene. All right, hey there, sleep-deprived friend. You're here because, well, let's be honest, you're probably lying in bed right now, eyes wide open, mind racing like a caffeinated hamster on a wheel. You've tried counting sheep. Do they even work? Seriously, who came up with that? Maybe you've even downloaded one of those sleep meditation apps where a soothing voice promises to lull you into dreamland. But instead, you're just more aware than ever of the sound of your neighbor's dog barking. And that's okay. Seriously, we've all been there. Or, well, here, in this very awake state, wishing for the sweet embrace of slumber. But instead of just telling you to relax, the most useless piece of advice ever given, isn't it? Let's actually explore why your brain is throwing a rave while the rest of your body is begging for a shutdown. Let's talk about the messy, fascinating, and sometimes downright annoying relationship between your mental health and your sleep. Because, surprise, they're totally intertwined. Like, think of them as two strands of licorice, all twisted up together. If one strand gets pulled, the other one feels it. You get the picture. You toss and turn, the sheets tangled around you like a disgruntled octopus. Maybe you check the time. Big mistake. Now you're calculating how many hours of sleep you could get if you magically drifted off right this second. Spoiler alert, it's never enough. This, my friend, is the insomnia anxiety spiral in action. It's a classic. You're probably familiar. Did you know that way back in ancient Greece, they had a god of sleep named Hypnos? He was considered pretty chill, just hanging out in a cave, sprinkling magical sleep dust on people. Sounds way better than our modern-day reality of staring at the ceiling until the sun comes up, doesn't it? You almost wish Hypnos was real and would pay you a visit. Bring some of that sleep dust. You deserve it. The thing is, your brain is a complicated organ. You probably know this, even in your sleep-deprived state. It's constantly processing information, emotions, worries, everything. And when those worries become overwhelming, When you're dealing with anxiety, stress, or even depression, your brain just doesn't want to shut down. It's like it's convinced that if it stops thinking, something terrible will happen, which, logically, isn't true. But logic and insomnia? Yeah, they're not exactly best friends. More like frenemies who passive-aggressively like each other's Instagram posts but secretly despise each other. So, what's actually happening up there in your brain when you're battling insomnia related to mental health? Well, it's a whole chemical cocktail gone a bit haywire. Your stress hormones, like cortisol, are probably elevated, keeping you in a state of hyperarousal. Your neurotransmitters, the little messengers that regulate mood and sleep, are likely out of whack. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, they're all doing their own weird dance, and nobody's quite in step. You might be lying there, desperately trying to relax, but your nervous system is basically stuck in fight or flight mode. It's convinced that you're facing a saber-toothed tiger, even though the only threat is your overflowing inbox or that awkward conversation you had with your boss 3 weeks ago. And honestly, sometimes, those things feel just as scary. Ever heard of sleep hygiene? It's not about showering before bed, though. Hey, that can't hurt. It's about creating a sleep-friendly environment and routine. Things like keeping your bedroom dark, quiet, and cool, think cave-like, just like hypnosis, avoiding caffeine and alcohol before bed, and establishing a consistent sleep schedule. It all sounds pretty basic, right? But it can make a difference. Small habits, big impact. Or at least, small potential impact. Let's be real. Sometimes even the best sleep hygiene in the world can't conquer a racing mind. Speaking of history, did you know that the invention of artificial light actually messed with our sleep patterns? Before electricity, people used to sleep in segments, with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. They'd use the time for quiet reflection, prayer, or even, other activities. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep was a natural human pattern or simply a consequence of limited light. Whatever the reason, imagine how different your nighttime experience would be if a middle-of-the-night awakening was perfectly normal. Now, here's a slightly quirky thought. Do you ever wonder if your dreams are trying to tell you something? Some people believe that dreams are a window into your subconscious, offering clues about your deepest fears, desires, and unresolved issues. Maybe that recurring dream about being chased by a giant rubber chicken is actually trying to tell you something profound. Or maybe it's just a really weird dream. Either way, pondering your dreams could be a way to understand what's contributing to your mental state. Of course, if your insomnia is significantly impacting your daily life, it's important to seek professional help. Talking to a therapist or psychiatrist can provide you with tools and strategies for managing anxiety, stress, and other mental health challenges that might be disrupting your sleep. And sometimes, medication can be a helpful part of the equation. There's no shame in that. Think of it as giving your brain a little nudge in the right direction, like gently pushing a stalled car uphill. You wouldn't expect the car to get moving by itself, would you? You might think, therapy? Nah, that's not for me. But seriously, think of it like this. You take your car to a mechanic when it's making weird noises. You go to a doctor when you're feeling sick. Why wouldn't you seek help when your brain, the most important engine in your entire system, isn't running smoothly? Beyond professional help, there are some things you can try on your own to quiet your mind before bed. Mindfulness techniques, like meditation or deep breathing exercises, can help you focus on the present moment and let go of racing thoughts. It's basically training your brain to be less chaotic. Like teaching a class of kindergartners to sit still for 5 minutes. It takes practice, but it's possible. You could also try journaling. Write down all those thoughts and worries that are swirling around in your head. Get them out of your brain and onto paper or a screen, if you prefer. It's like emptying out a mental trash can. Just don't read it right before bed, or you'll be right back where you started. One thing to keep in mind is that everyone's different. What works for one person might not work for another. It's all about experimenting and finding what helps you to relax and unwind. Maybe it's listening to calming music, taking a warm bath, reading a book, a boring book, ideally, or even just lying in bed and focusing on your breath. And remember, be kind to yourself. Insomnia is tough. It can be frustrating, exhausting, and downright demoralizing. But it's not your fault. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just a sign that your brain needs a little extra love and attention. Oh, and one more slightly out there tidbit. Some believe certain crystals can promote relaxation and sleep. Amethyst, for example, is often touted for its calming properties. Whether you believe in the power of crystals or not, hey, it can't hurt to try, right? Plus, a sparkly rock on your nightstand might just make you feel a little bit fancy. One final note. Some researchers think that our modern obsession with productivity is actually contributing to our sleep problems. The pressure to constantly be doing something, to always be on, makes it difficult to switch off and relax at the end of the day. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution improved overall human happiness, but it sure made us think we need to be working all the time. So, tonight, try to let go of that pressure. Give yourself permission to rest. Remind yourself that it's okay to not be productive 24/7. You deserve to sleep. You deserve to wake up feeling refreshed and energized. And even if you don't fall asleep right away, that's okay too. Just keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep being kind to yourself. You've got this. All right, lean back, fluff your pillow just so, and let's sink into the velvet cushions of Victorian anxieties, shall we? You trudge home after a long day, the gaslights casting long, distorted shadows that dance around you like mischievous sprites. The smog clings to your throat, a gritty reminder of London's industrial heart. You're bone-tired, ready for that blessed oblivion we call sleep. But hold on a minute. Because for the Victorians, slipping off to dreamland wasn't always as easy as extinguishing the bedside lamp. The Victorian era, that long reign of Queen Victoria herself, was a period of immense change, and with change comes, you guessed it, anxiety. The Industrial Revolution was chugging along, factories belching smoke, and people were flooding into cities in search of work. This meant crowded housing, sanitation issues that would make your stomach churn, and a general sense of, well, everything happening all at once. It's like trying to meditate in the middle of a heavy metal concert. Not exactly conducive to a good night's rest, is it? One thing you might not know is that the average life expectancy was significantly lower back then. Imagine knowing that, statistically speaking, you had fewer years ahead of you than you do right now. Suddenly, those deadlines at work feel a little less stressful, don't they? Now, factor in the Victorian obsession with morality and social status. You're constantly being judged by your neighbors, your family, the church, even the blasted chimney sweep judging whether he can get paid. Maintaining appearances was paramount. You had to be the perfect gentleman or the perfect lady, adhering to a rigid set of rules and expectations that probably left you more exhausted than any physical labor could. Forget just counting sheep. It was more like counting societal expectations. Historians still argue whether this constant pressure for outward perfection was genuinely internalized or simply a performance, but either way, it sure sounds draining. Speaking of exhausting, let's not forget the pervasive fear of poverty. One wrong move, one illness, and you could find yourself tumbling down the social ladder faster than you can say workhouse. This fear seeped into everything, including sleep. Nightmares of destitution and starvation were likely pretty common. On a lighter, or perhaps darker, note, there was also the Victorian fascination with death and the afterlife. Seances were all the rage. People were trying to contact the dead, which, frankly, sounds like a surefire recipe for insomnia. Imagine tossing and turning, wondering if Great Aunt Mildred is trying to tell you something from beyond the grave. You'd be reaching for the chamomile tea faster than you could say, "Oh, ja bored." And then there's the ever-present Victorian illness. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid fever. The list of diseases that could keep you up at night was longer than your arm. And the treatments? Often as terrifying as the ailments themselves. You really didn't want to get ill. It's a far cry from popping an ibuprofen and binge-watching Netflix, isn't it? Actually, even Queen Victoria suffered from insomnia. You know what that makes us? Royalty. One often overlooked aspect of Victorian life that affected sleep was the diet. High in refined sugar and lacking in fresh produce, it was hardly conducive to restful slumber. Think of it. You're wired on sugar all day, then crash at night, only to wake up in a cold sweat from the subsequent sugar withdrawal. Not ideal. And let's not forget the infamous Victorian plumbing, or lack thereof. The stench alone was probably enough to keep you awake. Can you imagine trying to relax when your house smells like a sewer? Of course, not everyone in Victorian England was suffering from sleep deprivation due to societal pressures. The upper classes, while also bound by certain social expectations, generally had access to better living conditions, food, and medical care. But even they weren't immune to the anxieties of the time. The fear of losing their wealth, the pressure to maintain their social standing, and the boredom that sometimes accompanies a life of leisure could all contribute to sleepless nights. Plus, they had to worry about their investments going bust, the things rich people worry about. Did you know that wealthy Victorians would often employ knocker-uppers to wake them in the morning? These individuals would use long poles to tap on windows, ensuring the wealthy wouldn't oversleep and miss their appointments. Talk about a niche profession. The rise of technology also played a role in Victorian sleep patterns. The advent of gas lighting meant that people were staying up later, engaging in more nighttime activities. This disrupted the natural sleep-wake cycle and contributed to the overall sense of restlessness. Sound familiar? We're not so different from our Victorian ancestors, are we? We're all just trying to navigate the complexities of modern life and get a decent night's sleep. Historians still debate the extent to which industrialization truly impacted sleep quality, as definitive metrics are hard to establish, but it's a safe bet that going from agrarian sunup to sundown schedules to factory shifts and electric lights caused some disruption. Another curious thing is the Victorian obsession with sleep aids, stuff to help you drift off. Laudanum, an opium-based tincture, was a popular choice, despite its highly addictive nature. It was prescribed for everything from coughs to headaches to, you guessed it, insomnia. Basically, the Victorian equivalent of Netflix and chill, but with significantly more risk of addiction. Let's just say their attitude to medicine was, shall we say, relaxed. All in all, the Victorian era was a breeding ground for anxiety, and anxiety is a major sleep disruptor. The social pressures, the Industrial Revolution, the fear of poverty, the fascination with death, the poor diet, the questionable medical practices, and the advent of technology all conspired to make a good night's sleep a precious commodity. So the next time you find yourself struggling to fall asleep, remember our Victorian friends. You're not alone in your sleeplessness. In fact, you're participating in a long and storied tradition of worrying yourself awake. But maybe, just maybe, understanding the anxieties of the past can help us better cope with the anxieties of the present. And who knows, maybe it'll even help you drift off to sleep tonight. All right, settle in, friend. Let's dim the lights a little, shall we? You've had a long day, haven't you? Staring at screens, battling deadlines, probably mainlining caffeine. I get it. Trust me, I get it. And now, as the world outside begins to quiet, your brain decides it's time to throw a party. Ugh. We're going to explore the rather interesting world of Victorian sleep cures and see just how much of that era's questionable wisdom lingers in your nightly routine. Or rather, in your attempt at a routine. You reach for your melatonin gummies, don't you? Or maybe you're more of a chamomile tea person. Perhaps a weighted blanket is your jam. Whatever your go-to-sleep aid is, you might be surprised to know how much, or how little, it has in common with the potions and practices of the Victorian era. Imagine yourself transported back to the 19th century. Gas lamps flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on the cobblestone streets. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and something vaguely floral, probably a heavily perfumed attempt to mask less pleasant odors. You're struggling to sleep, plagued by anxieties real and imagined. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, disease is rampant, and your corset is probably digging into your ribs. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? So, what does a restless Victorian do? Well, they wouldn't just pop a melatonin gummy. That's far too convenient. Back then, you'd likely consult a physician or, more commonly, your friendly neighborhood apothecary. These folks were the OG wellness gurus, doling out remedies that ranged from the mildly helpful to the downright alarming. Historians still argue whether the Victorian era was a golden age of medical advancement or a period of spectacularly misguided interventions. I'm leaning towards the latter, frankly, but let's be charitable and say it was both star. One common recommendation? Opium. Yes, that opium. Laudanum, an opium-based tincture, was the Victorian era's answer to everything from insomnia to, well, pretty much anything. Toothache? Laudanum. Colicky baby? Laudanum. Existential dread? Laudanum. It was considered perfectly acceptable, even fashionable, to dose yourself and your children with this highly addictive substance. And you think your sleep schedule is messed up? You can practically taste the irony, can't you? The Victorians, obsessed with societal order and moral rectitude, were simultaneously addicted to a drug that could induce lethargy and delusion. The cognitive dissonance is almost beautiful. Almost. But opium wasn't the only option. You might also be prescribed chloral hydrate, another powerful sedative that, like opium, carried a hefty risk of addiction and potential overdose. Think of it as the Victorian Ambien, only way more potent. If you found yourself tossing and turning, a dose of chloral hydrate would knock you out faster than you can say goodnight, Irene. The problem, of course, was waking up and staying awake and not becoming hopelessly dependent. And then there were the more interesting remedies. Some doctors advocated for bloodletting to cure insomnia. The idea was that draining excess, bad humors would restore balance to the body and calm the mind. Now, I don't know about you, but the thought of someone sticking a needle in me right before bed sounds like a one-way ticket to anxiety central. Just me? Okay. Another, slightly less gruesome, approach involved something called animal magnetism or mesmerism. This was basically hypnosis, often performed with dramatic flair and the use of magnets. The idea was that a trained mesmerist could manipulate your animal spirits and induce a state of relaxation and sleep. It sounds utterly bonkers, doesn't it? And yet, it was surprisingly popular. And maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. After all, hypnosis is still used today as a legitimate therapeutic tool, though thankfully without the need for magnets and dramatic swooning. You might even find yourself directed towards electric therapies. Electrical devices were the must-have wellness gadget, with claims that electric currents could stimulate the brain and nervous system to induce sleep. And did it work? Well, probably not. But it certainly gave people something to talk about at dinner parties. Oh, darling, have you tried the new electric sleep cap? It's simply divine. Now, let's not forget the power of a good old-fashioned cup of tea. Herbal remedies have been used for centuries to promote relaxation and sleep, and the Victorians were no exception. Chamomile, lavender, valerian root. These were all common ingredients in Victorian sleep potions. The difference, of course, was that in the Victorian era, you couldn't just stroll down to your local organic grocer and pick up a pre-packaged tea blend. You had to forage for these herbs yourself or rely on the knowledge of a local herbalist. Think of it as the original farm-to-table sleep aid. Historians still argue whether the placebo effect was stronger in the Victorian era, given the sheer theatricality of the remedies. I suspect it probably was. The Victorians also believed in the importance of routine and ritual when it came to sleep. A regular bedtime, a calming pre-sleep routine, a comfortable and well-ventilated bedroom. These were all considered essential for a good night's rest. They knew that a consistent sleep schedule can help regulate the body's natural sleep-wake cycle. And, truthfully, this bit of advice is actually pretty solid. So go ahead, establish a routine. Just maybe skip the laudanum and bloodletting. Even something as simple as a bedtime story was seen as a way to promote relaxation and sleep. But, being the Victorians, these stories were often filled with moral lessons and dire warnings about the consequences of bad behavior. Forget sweet dreams. You were more likely to have nightmares about ending up in the workhouse if you didn't behave yourself. It's amazing anyone got any sleep at all. So, what's the legacy of these Victorian sleep cures? Well, thankfully, we've moved away from the more dangerous and addictive substances. But the core principles remain surprisingly relevant. The emphasis on routine, herbal remedies, and creating a calming environment is still very much a part of the modern sleep aid landscape. You might not be drinking laudanum before bed, but you're probably sipping chamomile tea or diffusing lavender oil. You're just a slightly more enlightened, and hopefully less addicted, version of your Victorian counterpart. And hey, even the more bizarre remedies have left their mark. The fascination with alternative therapies, the belief in the power of the mind-body connection, the willingness to try anything to get a good night's sleep. These are all echoes of the Victorian era's sometimes misguided, but always fascinating, quest for slumber. Maybe there's a tiny part of you that secretly wants to try animal magnetism. Don't worry, I won't judge. Much. It's also worth noting that the Victorians, for all their faults, were grappling with many of the same sleep-related issues that we face today. Stress, anxiety, overstimulation. These were all factors that contributed to sleeplessness in the 19th century, just as they do now. The Industrial Revolution brought about a fast-paced, demanding lifestyle that left many people feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. Sound familiar? Yep, some things never change. The difference, of course, is that we now have access to a wider range of tools and resources to help us manage our sleep. We have sleep trackers, sleep psychologists, and a seemingly endless supply of sleep-inducing products. But at the end of the day, the goal is the same: to find a way to quiet our minds and drift off into a peaceful slumber, even if that means relying on a slightly less terrifying version of a Victorian remedy. So, the next time you reach for your sleep mask or turn on your white noise machine, take a moment to appreciate the long and winding road that led us here. From opium dens to weighted blankets, the quest for a good night's sleep has been a constant throughout history. And who knows, maybe in another 100 years, people will be looking back at our current sleep aids with the same mixture of amusement and horror that we feel when we think about Victorian laudanum. Perhaps our obsession with blue light blocking glasses will be seen as quaint and misguided. Only time will tell. But for now, let's just focus on getting you some rest. Turn off your phone, dim the lights, and take a few deep breaths. And remember, if all else fails, you can always try counting sheep. Although, frankly, I find the thought of sheep just makes me more anxious. Are they properly sheared? Are they getting enough to eat? Are they judging my questionable life choices? Ugh. Anyway, my friend, it's probably time to wind down. Hopefully, this little trip through the annals of Victorian sleep remedies has been mildly entertaining, if not entirely sleep-inducing. Sweet dreams, or at least attempted dreams. Okay, settle in. You've made it to the final installment of our little Victorian sleep saga. You've already tried counting sheep, which, let's be honest, just leads to allergies and existential dread, lukewarm baths, who has time for that, and reading endless treatises on proper digestion. Still wide awake? Don't worry, we've got a few more tricks up our sleep-deprived sleeves. You find yourself back in that dimly lit Victorian bedroom. Dust motes dance in the faint moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. The air is thick with the scent of lavender and despair, or perhaps just lavender. You adjust the embroidered pillow beneath your head and sigh. It's late, you're tired, but sleep stubbornly eludes you. You know you're not alone. Insomnia was, surprisingly, quite the widespread complaint back in the 19th century. They even had a catchy name for it: sleeplessness. Groundbreaking, I know. You might find some solace in knowing that even Queen Victoria herself was rumored to have struggled with insomnia. Imagine, even with an entire empire at her beck and call, she couldn't command her brain to just shut off. Maybe she was kept up at night wondering whether she accidentally invented the resting bitch face. Historians still argue whether her sleeplessness was due to stress, anxiety, or just the sheer weight of that crown. And you thought your problems were bad. Now, the Victorians, bless their hearts, were prolific inventors. You might be surprised to learn they were just as creative with their cures for insomnia. We've covered some of the more conventional methods, but let's delve into the slightly eccentric, shall we say? You may recall that a good, solid meal was considered a remedy, but eating weird stuff would only add to one's woes. So here is the cure. One popular remedy involved wearing socks filled with hops to bed. Yes, hops, like the stuff they use to make beer. The idea was that the aroma would be calming and induce sleep. You can practically smell the microbrewery on their feet now, can't you? I bet they had some interesting dreams. On the opposite end of the olfactory spectrum, some doctors recommended sleeping with a piece of camphor under your pillow. Camphor, for those of you unfamiliar, has a strong medicinal scent. Think mothballs meets Vicks VapoRub. Now, personally, I think I'd rather wrestle a badger than spend a night breathing in camphor fumes. But hey, to each their own. Perhaps, on the very fringe, the Victorians may have believed that the strong smell would ward off evil spirits that might be keeping you awake. You might be thinking, okay, socks full of beer ingredients and mothball pillows. What else have you got? Well, how about hypnotism? That's right, the Victorians were fascinated with hypnotism, and it was often used to treat all sorts of ailments, including insomnia. You imagine a stern-looking gentleman with a swirling pocket watch, intoning, "You are feeling sleepy, very sleepy." While it might seem a bit outlandish today, hypnotism actually has some scientific backing as a sleep aid. Historians still argue whether its efficacy stemmed from genuine neurological effects or just the placebo effect. But honestly, if someone could hypnotize me into finally folding all my laundry, I'd be a convert in a heartbeat. Speaking of treatments that might sound a little, shall we say, out there, let's talk about phrenology. Phrenology, if you don't know, was the pseudoscience of studying the shape of the skull to determine a person's character and mental capacities. And yes, you guessed it, Some phrenologists claimed they could diagnose and treat insomnia by examining the bumps on your head. You can picture it now. A Victorian phrenologist carefully feeling your skull, proclaiming, yes, I see the problem. Your organ of sleep is clearly underdeveloped. We must stimulate it with this spoon. While phrenology has long been debunked as utter nonsense, it's interesting to note that the Victorians were actively searching for physical explanations for mental and emotional problems. One legitimate advance in the late Victorian era was the invention of the electric light bulb by Thomas Edison. Now, while this undoubtedly revolutionized the world, it also inadvertently contributed to the rise of insomnia. Imagine going from candlelight and gas lamps to the harsh glare of electric lights. It must have been a real shock to the system and probably disrupted a lot of sleep cycles. You pull the heavy quilt a little higher, wrapping yourself in its warmth. The silence of the room is broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound is almost hypnotic. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the rhythmic sound, trying to quiet the swirling thoughts in your mind. You've learned that the Victorians were just as desperate for a good night's sleep as we are today. They tried everything from herbal remedies to pseudoscientific treatments, all in the pursuit of that elusive state of restful slumber. They even had designated sleeping rooms, separate from the bedroom, designed to be as quiet and dark as possible. You can understand the appeal. Imagine a room dedicated solely to sleep. No laundry piles, no work deadlines, just pure, unadulterated slumber. Now, as you lie there in your mind's eye, you might be thinking, all this Victorian stuff is interesting, but what about me? What can I do to finally fall asleep? Well, the truth is, the best sleep remedies are often the simplest. You could try some modern takes on Victorian practices. Consider a cup of chamomile tea instead of hops in your socks. Turn off your electronic devices and dim the lights an hour before bed. Maybe try a little gentle stretching or meditation. Find something that works for you, something that calms your mind and relaxes your body. Historians still argue whether modern life is inherently more conducive to insomnia than the Victorian era. On one hand, we have access to advanced medical treatments and sleep aids. On the other hand, we're constantly bombarded with screens, notifications, and the relentless pressures of modern society. It's a tough call, but for tonight, you don't need to worry about any of that. You can just focus on breathing, in and out, letting go of the day's stresses and anxieties. Let your body sink deeper into the mattress, feeling the support beneath you. Imagine yourself drifting on a calm, peaceful river, the gentle current carrying you towards a land of dreams. Wind down. The air is still, the room is dark, perhaps you hear the faint rustle of leaves outside your window, or the soft chirping of crickets in the distance. These sounds, simple and natural, can be surprisingly soothing, drawing you further into a state of relaxation. You feel your muscles softening, releasing the tension you've been holding onto all day. There's no need to strive, no need to analyze, just simply be, let your mind wander, like clouds drifting lazily across a summer sky. Don't try to control your thoughts, just observe them, and let them float away, like dandelion seeds on a gentle breeze. You are safe, you are comfortable, you are surrounded by peace, and sleep is coming, slowly, gently, enveloping you like a warm blanket on a cold night. Let go of any worries, any fears. Everything is all right. Your breath becomes deeper, slower, your eyelids grow heavy, so heavy, sinking down, 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 into the darkness, into the quiet, into the sweet embrace of sleep. That's it. Just drift, just rest. Everything will be waiting for you when you awake, refreshed, renewed, ready to greet a new day. Sleep now, sleep soundly, sweet dreams.